Okay, good morning, everyone. Before I get seriously going on today's topic, I just want to remind everyone that we do have a Wisdom Path session next Saturday, and it's going to be with Mary Stein, who's one of the leading Jungian analysts in the world. And Mary has kindly agreed to come on and talk about his book, Men Under Construction. And that book is significant because right now we're going to have, just put my MailChimp thing on to YouTube. It's significant because on the 12th of March, the morning or the evening after this session on Saturday, will be the Academy Awards. And one of the big topics at the Academy Awards is going to be the condition of men. Men are in serious trouble because they can't find meaning, and they can't find purpose in the world now, it seems, or some men can't. I think I've probably found my purpose for the rest of my life. But let's see. Okay, and there's Brian. Great. So anyway, this is on the YouTube channel. I've just put a link, and I'll put it here again. Although if you're on our list, you should have seen this already. But this review that I just put on here is a very, very interesting story about what is happening to men right now. And you may not have any interest in this, but it really has a lot to do with what's going to happen to our culture in the future. And so read that, and then if you're not on our Wisdom Path mailing list, please do join, because we often have very interesting sessions on Wisdom Path. And this one is going to be a humdinger with Mary Stein on his book, Men Under Construction, even though the book is a little bit dated, but it's still topical. And if you read that, see, I have to find where I am here, as I seem to have gotten myself. Okay, there we go. It's very topical because of the Banshees of Inisherin, which has been nominated for 9 Academy Awards, apparently. And when I watched it before reading that review, and I said, "Oh my God, why are we making a movie about this?" I mean, that was my reaction to it. Originally, just seeing the movie, because I'd heard the name of it many times, and I thought I should take a look. And so I took a look, and I go, "Oh my God." And then I read this review, which I've put the link on both the Zoom group and the YouTube chat. And then you kind of understand what it is that they're talking about. So on Saturday, the 11th, Murray Stein is going to speak to us about his book, Men Under Construction, in the context of that review. It's going to be a very interesting session. Murray has had the most hits of anybody on our Wisdom Path over the years. I think one of his sessions with us had over 11,000 hits, if I recall. I haven't looked recently. And it's topical for today because, basically it means that men are in hell, and I've definitely been observing that in our school systems, and in how we educate young people, both men and women. It's truly frightening what's happening. And so I do hope that you'll take a look at both the review and then sign up for Wisdom Path on our MailChimp and join us next Saturday. It will be 1 p.m. Eastern time. Murray is in Zurich, so it's 7 p.m. for him. And but that does get us to most of the United States, including Honolulu, at 8 a.m. So I hope you can all join us. So today is an ever fascinating topic. I'm sure we'll have many things to say. And I see some notable people who are cloaked here on our panel, but I would really encourage you to uncloak and comment on this, because otherwise I'm going to be talking for a long time by myself, and that's a little hard. But anyway, so we're in chapter 8 of the Red Book by C.G. Jung. I'm using the Reader's Edition, which is affordable for most people, and we're on page 169 of the Reader's Edition, beginning with the bottom paragraph. And this is, what do you think of the essence of hell? So I'll just read this section and then I'll stop for comments and see what comments this generates. I've been there a couple of times, so I know what he means. All right, so the paragraph continues. What do you think of the essence of hell? Hell is when the depths come to you with all that you no longer are or are not yet capable of. Hell is when you can no longer attain what you could attain. Hell is when you must think and feel and do everything that you know you do not want. Hell is when you know that your having to is also a wanting to, and that you yourself are responsible for it. Hell is when you know that everything serious that you have planned with yourself is also laughable, that everything fine is also brutal, that everything good is also bad, that everything high is also low, and that everything pleasant is also shameful. But the deepest hell is when you realize that hell is also no hell, but a cheerful heaven, not a heaven in itself, but in this respect, a heaven, and in that respect, a hell. Okay, I think I'll stop there because that's a lot of stuff there. So, Brian, you uncloak. So, would you like to comment on this?
Yeah, I think can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I guess what hits me is that's at a point of like chaos, because what hit me is thinking about it is like a thermocline in water. You got cold, heavy water, and then you come up to this place where it shifts, and then you got, warm, light water. There's this place where it can mix, and the gradient goes away, and the split goes away.
Yeah.
So it's almost like chaos, like prima materia chaos.
Right. Well, what particularly comes to mind for me is how much we've had the way at least Christianity is taught in the Western world, and particularly in the United States, in my experience. But we've been taught that heaven is outside us and hell is below. And as I have worked through most of Jungian psychology. I can't say I've gotten to everything. I surely haven't. But I have read the Red Book multiple times. And even after reading this, I didn't really realize that this was Jung talking about actual hell, but what is in our heads, in our psyches, and not out there. There's no heaven there in space. There's no hell down below us, except a hell that's completely unlivable, in the sense that the center of the earth is molten iron, or maybe something even deeper than molten iron, as they've discovered recently. But there's no creatures there that are dying in fire and brimstone, or suffering in fire and brimstone. The suffering happens in our lives, in our psyches. And also heaven happens in our lives and in our psyches. And if you understand that, then the Christian message or the Jewish message, any religious message, can have meaning and can be not overridden by the scientific method. Okay. And that's one of the big problems that we've had in our society for many years, since observed since the time of Nietzsche, but observed by Matthew Arnold in his poem Dover Beach, going back to 1853, and I realized in my own life, because of my upbringing as a sort of plain vanilla Christian in Navy chapels, and taught by the Navy Chaplains Corps, that I had a hard time crossing over, because I was always thinking of that heaven up there, hell down there business. And it took me a long, long time to figure out that we were really talking, and Christianity is metaphor for the hell and the heaven that's inside us. That was quite tough, took a long time to work out. Finally I did. And so, here in just a couple of paragraphs, Dr. Jung has given us what hell really is for most people. Okay, so even these first couple of second sentence, hell is when the depths come to you with all that you no longer are. Well, certainly for older dudes like me, I certainly recognize that there are things that I no longer am, and fortunately for me, I'm good with that. I have come to terms with my mortality long ago, and so I don't find difficulty with that. With the fact that I no longer can, kick a soccer ball or do a lot of things that I wish I could in the past. And then it goes on, or are not yet capable of. So that would be for students going through school who are not yet capable or qualified to do a bunch of things which they're trying to learn. And so in a sense, school can be a hell for people. And so then going on here, what hell is when you could no longer attain what you could attain. Okay, so in my life, and I'm sure everybody else's, at some point in your life, you have a dream that you can be this or that. And, at one point I wanted to become an attorney, and so I became an attorney, and then I found out just what hell that is to practice law. And so you start to feel everything. As he says, hell is when you must think and feel and do everything that you know you do not want to. And so in my career, hell was practicing law. I really enjoyed going to law school. I detested the practice of law. It was a pure hell for me in many ways. And fortunately, I was smart enough to figure that out pretty early on, and got myself in business school, and then went off and had a business career. But amazing how accurately this describes what's happened in my own life. So I'll shut up. So Brian, want to say anything? Or
Well, I mean, kind of sounds like that situation where, like the Schrodinger's cat, you don't know if the cat's alive or dead, but when you observe it, then the uncertainty equation collapses and it's either dead or alive.
Right.
And I'm 61, and I can have no more children. It just doesn't make sense. But I've had surgery that's to save my life that keeps me. I won't have children. So there's all sorts of things that go on. Like I'm coming to the end of my career. All those things, and doors are actually closing. Some doors are opening, but the number of doors opening is.
I'm sorry, you froze for a moment there. So from the time that you said I can have no more children, and then we lost you.
Oh, I'm sorry. I said,
okay.
I had surgery to save my life, and so I can't have children. So door closed, coming to the end of my career. And there are doors opening, but the number of doors opening, the ratio has changed.
Yes.
There's doors closing.
Right.
But don't you think a lot of it has to do with the soul's evolution?
Surely.
We're all here to evolve. And when things like that, things that happen to you, it's to promote your souls to evolve.
Yes, I agree with you entirely. However, nobody gets educated in that.
I know, because it's not spoken of anywhere, whether it's religion, education, and that's why all these systems have to collapse. Because now it is time for our souls to evolve.
Absolutely. I agree with you entirely on that. Mm-hmm. And, it would be a lot better if we breathed the whiff of this even in elementary school. Right. Certainly no later than middle school, when kids are going through puberty. Mm-hmm. They need to be aware of this, because I can go to school every day and I can harangue the kids about the need for education and how life is tough, and you need to be able to know how to do things and get things done. But without a context, it's meaningless to them. It's truly meaningless to them. And so we really need to, 50% of American marriages are failing. And so, probably near 50% of all the kids in school are having social difficulties of huge proportions, and they're not getting mental health help, and they're not getting an explanation of how this happens and what happens to you. And so they have no context for it. And so we have behavioral problems. We have, by middle school, we basically have Lord of the Flies, right, pretty much happening. And, until we face that, mm-hmm. and realize that we need to educate these kids better, the behavior will be hopeless, and we're going to produce,
but
then flawed again, human beings.
But then again, you see, it has a lot to do with humanity's consciousness.
Yes, that's right.
That's what has created the situation that we're in, is the way humans think. And the way we think is caused from the control efforts on to make sure humans don't know that we have the God within and hell within.
Right.
And once we as human beings realize that we are heaven and hell within each one of us,
yeah,
and every thought we think and every word we say creates our reality of tomorrow.
right.
So it's because of what we think, say, and do is what is creating the reality that we're living in right now today.
Absolutely.
So because
and
that's
certainly
been held
for adults, right? Certainly for adults.
for everybody. So that's
Yeah.
been held from all of us because that's how they control us. They being whatever, religion, medical, whoever, the media.
Yeah.
They're controlling
Absolutely.
us by not letting us know. And even in all of our upbringing, none of us were exposed to this. We've always been under the control of whatever,
Right.
because they don't want us to realize that we create our reality through our thinking.
Right.
Because once humans figure that out, we can create a whole different world. And that's what our next step is.
Of course.
These systems have to collapse. The educational, the medical, the financial, all these systems are going to collapse.
Yeah.
Because they no longer work. And they no longer work because they're not controlled by love. There's nothing to do with love, thought form, consciousness. All of those words are never mentioned anywhere.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's what it's getting to be, because we're moving into the age of Aquarius. And
Yeah,
the age of Aquarius is that, where the Piscean age is collapsing and falling away. And that's why I think Carl Jung was speaking about all of this, trying to get us to realize we have the control. Take it.
Yeah. Yeah, we have the control. Take it.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Sorry.
See what happened to our. Okay, I guess our YouTube feed is working all right. I agree with you entirely, Nancy. And you know, I see school systems struggling. They say, I've had administrators tell me that they feel like they're walking on eggs because they can't, you know, almost anything they say is going to get some parent mad at them. And so they get all these parental calls, and so the school system has become toxic.
Right.
And
it's a collapsing system.
Right. And you know, the amazing thing that I've observed since last September, when I started to substitute teach, that has allowed me to be in many of our local schools at every level, from pre-K up to 12th grade. And what I observe is that the students are getting a much better education than I got when I was coming along, in terms of raw content. Okay, in other words, I have had fourth graders tell me something that I didn't learn until the 10th grade, for example. And I've had 10th graders who were doing legal briefs that I never learned to do until I was in law school. And so from that perspective, the quality of the curriculum is wonderful. Okay, but because of what you're talking about, we have huge behavioral problems. People are afraid to discipline their children, and administrators are very strictly controlled in terms of how much they can discipline their children. And the result is that even though we have this wonderful curriculum, where in bits and pieces it's terrific, in otherwise it's just useless, and we're creating human beings that aren't ready for prime time, not at all, in my view anyway. Yeah, and you know, they may know a lot of wonderful facts, and they may know a lot about the scientific method, but they don't know anything about living. And you know, as probably the panel here and many of my followers know, you can't predict what's going to happen to you in a lifetime. And you know, if you ask the 28-year-old me who had just started practicing law, whether I would be doing now what I'm doing now. There's no chance that I would have predicted it. And yet my life has had enough, bumps along the way so that I'm here. And for the last 13 years, I've been trying to actually promote into the public consciousness the thoughts of Dr. Jung. And so I see its value, but getting anybody in the educational system to even talk to you about that is just impossible.
Well, yeah, that's the problem with the collapsing system. There has to be the chaos before the collapse, right?
Right.
So
right.
that's about where we are right now in a lot of systems.
And, in the school system, the teachers are just beside themselves because they have no time to think. And so they, in the state of Maryland, as far as I understand, they have to teach exactly the curriculum that is dictated at the state level.
Yeah, that's that control.
Right. And therefore, they're just trying to first understand what the curriculum is and then present it. And they just don't have any thoughts about anything else because they've never thought about it. They've never had a chance to think about it. Yeah. But anyway, so maybe I should go on. That was a bit of a diversion, but so hell is inside of us, is the essence of what Dr. Jung has said here. And I'm just going to read on. And I'm going to read this short last paragraph just to bring the context up. But the deepest hell is when you realize that hell is also no hell, but a cheerful heaven, not a heaven in itself, but in this respect, a heaven, and in that respect, a hell. That is the ambiguity of God. He is born from a dark ambiguity and rises to a bright ambiguity. Unequivocalness is simplicity and leads to death, but ambiguity is the way of life. If the left foot does not move, then the right one does, and you move. The God wills this. You say, the Christian God is unequivocal. He is love. But what is more ambiguous than love? Love is the way of life, but your love is only on the way of life if you have a left and a right. Nothing is easier than to play at ambiguity, and nothing is more difficult than living ambiguity. He who plays is a child. His God is old and dies. He who lives is awakened. His God is young and goes on. He who plays hides from the inner death. He who lives feels the going onward and immortality. So leave the play to the players. Let fall that what wants to fall. If you stop it, it will sweep you away. There is a true love that does not concern itself with neighbors. All right, any comment on that? Okay. There's a footnote here. Probably I should read. In 1952, Jung wrote to W.C. concerning the intentional ambiguity of his writings. The language, quote, the language I speak must be equivocal, that is, ambiguous, to do justice to psychic nature with its double aspect. I strive consciously and deliberately for ambiguous expressions, because it is superior to unequivocalness and corresponds to the nature of being. Okay, that's a pretty profound thing that he says there, because this is Jung admitting why his writings are, too complicated for a lot of people, because it's really ambiguous, a lot of it. Then footnote 143, after the sentence, "the God wills this," it says, the draft continues, "Look at the images of the gods that the ancients and the men of old left behind. Their nature is ambiguous and equivocal." And so then 144, 1 John 4:16, "God is love, and he that dwelleth in love dwelleth in God, and God in him." Okay. So we have the Bible itself saying that God is within us, not out there in space. And then footnote 145, the sentence reads, "There is a true love that does not concern itself with neighbors." And the footnote is, the draft continues, quote, "Whoever reverses this word and others that I speak is a player, since he doesn't respect the spoken word. Know that you attain yourself from what you read in a book. You read as much into a book as out of it." My librarian friends will love that one. Okay, any further comment? We'll go on. Let's see what Kathy has said here. So Richard Casper has said, "God makes it rain on the good and the bad." And John T says, "Language has never been so heavily pregnant. It's difficult to discuss what needs discussion. Harpocrates, precedent, omerta." Okay, I don't know what that is. Kathy, I know it might relate to La Cosa Nostra, but I'm not sure about that. So Kathy says, "The other half of all this, as I individualize, what I release creates space for an infusion of fill in the blanks. Leaving the void in ourselves and systems is risky. Infusing what I want, my eternal hell feeds on a void." Amen to that. Okay. All right, going on, page 171 at the top. "When the hero was slain and the meaning recognized in the absurdity, when all tension came rushing down from gravid clouds, when everything had become cowardly and looked to its own rescue, I became aware of the birth of the God. Opposing me, the God sank into my heart when I was confirmed by mockery and worship, by grief and laughter, by yes and no. The one arose from the melting together of the two. He was born as a child from my own human soul, which had conceived him with resistance like a virgin. Thus it corresponds to the image that the ancients have given to us. But when the mother, my soul, was pregnant with the God, I did not know it. It even seemed to me as if my soul herself was the God, although he lived only in her body." Okay, let me read some footnotes here. Well, obviously there's a reference to the Virgin Mary here. So anyway, going on. "And thus the image of the ancients is fulfilled. I pursued my soul to kill the child in it, for I am also the worst enemy of my God. But I also recognize that my enmity is decided upon in the God. He is mockery and hate and anger, since this is also a way of life. I must say that God could not come into being before the hero had been slain. The hero, as we understand him, has become an enemy of the God, since the hero is perfection. The gods envy the perfection of man because perfection has no need of the gods. But since no one is perfect, we need the gods. The gods love perfection because it is the total way of life, but the gods are not with him who wishes to be perfect because he is an imitation of perfection. Imitation was a way of life when men still needed the heroic prototype. The monkey's manner is a way of life for monkeys, and for man, as long as he is like a monkey. Human apishness has lasted a terribly long time, but the time will come when a piece of that apishness will fall away from men. That will be a time of salvation and the dove, and the eternal fire and redemption will descend. Then there will no longer be a hero, and no one who can imitate him, because from that time henceforth, all imitations is cursed. All imitation is cursed. The new God laughs at imitation and discipleship. He needs no imitators and no pupils. He forces men through himself. The God is his own follower in man. He imitates himself. Okay, so there's some good stuff about the hero in there. Does anybody have a comment on that? I think the most interesting part of it is related to perfection, because people try to be awfully hard to be perfect. Especially in the arts, you want to be able to paint something perfectly, except that you can't. And even if you do, for example, in the arts, in trompe l'oeil, the artist is trying to be so real that you think the artwork is more real than the actual vision. Okay, and the problem with that is that it gets bypassed. And so there were trompe l'oeil artists for 200-300 years, I guess, and we still have some of them today. And I guess it's a badge of success for some artists to be able to paint trompe l'oeil. But we have cameras for that now. We don't need artists to do that. And then what happens? Then you're bypassed. Your art form is bypassed, and you're left behind. And who wants a trompe l'oeil when you can have an Ansel Adams or something like that?
Well, one thing about perfection is that it also implies being done. It implies
right.
There's nothing else to do.
Right.
It also implies rigidity.
Right.
Something that I just read, the Bacchae by Euripides, and I think it's pretty timely. Because Pentheus is very much Ron DeSantis. And and Dionysus is this gender fluid cross-dresser. And so I think one of the things that's happening is that we're out of whatever was going on that was coherent, we're starting to see more and more the bipolarity of the archetypes. And I think that's part of the crisis, is
Right.
that there isn't like a central consensus meaning. There's no meaning, like depends on who you ask.
Right.
And I the thing is that in response to becoming more gender fluid and accepting, out of that arises a compensation of rigidity and authoritarianism and more toxic patriarchy. So I just think that we're in the midst of the archetypes sort of coming apart.
Well, and coming back together in a different way.
Mhm.
And I always had to chuckle at the national car rental guy who was this guy with the football player build and the square jaw and the very deep voice, and he says, "I go to national car rental because blah 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 blah." I said, "Oh my God, this guy has such a little girl inside him." he, he must be a total coward because he can't, you can't be that way. And the people who are the really courageous ones are the ones who don't look like that, because they have more courage coming from inside, and they're often there's some wonderful stories from the military where people who were not expected ever to be a hero or seen as a hero actually did amazing things, like Sergeant York. He comes marching back into camp with 75 Germans in tow, and he's captured all 75 of them single-handedly. Whoever expected that? And you wouldn't be able to teach it even if you could expect it, which you can't. So anyway, all right, reading on then. We think there is a singleness within us and communality outside us. Outside us is the communal in relation to the external, which singleness refers to us. We are single if we are in ourselves, but communal in relation to what is outside us. But if we are outside of ourselves, then we are single and selfish in the communal. Our self suffers privation if we are outside ourselves, and thus it satisfies its needs with communality. Consequently, communality is distorted into singleness. If we are in ourselves, we fulfill the need of the self. We prosper, and through this, we become aware of the needs of the communal and can fulfill them. So really, I find a very introverted student who is very self-possessed and knows what they're about, and they just don't pay any attention to the rest of the kids in the school. It's just fascinating to watch. And so I guess in middle and high school, we fall into these cliques where we think that the cool kids table is the winning table, but that's not true at all. That's not true at all. And the lucky table is the kid who's been through a struggle and managed to survive. That's the one. But anyway, right. Shanti says it's going to take reckless faith to shuffle home in one piece, but shuffle we must. Well said, Shanti. Okay. All right. So there was a lot in that paragraph, and I'm going to ask you to buy the book and go to page 172 and read it for yourself, because if we spend all the time that particular paragraph that I just read deserves for comment, we wouldn't be able to talk about anything else this morning. So I'm just going to continue for the time being. If we set a God outside of ourselves, he tears us loose from the self, since the God is more powerful than we are. Our self falls into privation. But if the God moves into the self, he snatches us from what is outside us. we arrive in singleness in ourselves. So the God becomes communal in reference to what is outside us, but single in relation to us. No one has my God, but my God has everyone, including myself. The gods of all individual men always have all other men, including myself. So it is always only the one God, despite his multiplicity. You arrive at him in yourself, and only through yourself seizing you. It seizes you in the advancement of your life. The hero must fall for the sake of our redemption, since he is the model and demands imitation. But the measure of imitation is fulfilled. We should become reconciled to solitude in ourselves and to the God outside of us. If we enter into the solitude, then the life of the God begins. If we are in ourselves, then the space around us is free, but filled by the God. Let me see what the footnote here is. Jung says, individuation and collectivity, that the individual must now consolidate himself by cutting himself off from God and becoming wholly himself, thereby at the same time he also separates himself from society. Outwardly he plunges into solitude, but inwardly into hell, distant from God. And that was from infrequently visited collected work 18, paragraph 1103. That's where that came from. Our relations to men go through this empty space and also through the God, but earlier it went through selfishness, since we were outside ourselves. Therefore, the Spirit foretold to me that the cold of outer space will spread across the earth. With this, he showed me in an image that God will step between men and drive every individual with the whip of icy cold to the warmth of his own monastic hearth, because people were beside themselves, going into raptures like madmen. Selfish desire ultimately desires itself. You find yourself in your desire, so do not say that desire is vain. If you desire yourself, you produce the divine Son in your embrace with yourself. Your desire is the father of the God. Yourself is the mother of the God, but the Son is the new God, your master. If you embrace yourself, then it will appear to you as if the world has become cold and empty. The coming God moves into this emptiness. Okay, I'll stop there for a moment. So it seems to me, and certainly anybody in the panel can speak up, but it seems to me that what he's saying here is that you're not going to find yourself, you're not going to find happiness until you start living your own life, not anyone else's. So as we look at the arts, for example, if Picasso said when he was 12 he could paint like Goya because his father was an art teacher, and so he could paint like Goya when he was 12. Then he had to learn how to paint like Picasso. And the point is that yes, you can use your reference and you can copy it and change it enough so nobody's going to sue you for copyright infringement or whatever. But if you're going to be a unique artist, and all of us are, all of us have an originality to us, we have to learn to look inward. And this is the strength of what my friend Colleen Keybert refers to when she's talking about the doodle. Okay, because with the doodle, you're not copying anybody else. You're putting what you yourself want to put on the page, and so you're finding yourself in that way. And it took me probably 50 years to start figuring it out, what was causing certain things that I was doodling to come out in the way that they did. I won't bother you with, because it would sound prideful to tell you what my doodles were about when I was in the 4th grade, but I know. But I never understood why I was creating the symbol over and over and over again in my notebooks and so on. And to this day, I use the same symbol when I'm underlining my books. So, and that hasn't changed for over 60 years. So anyway,
I think a lot of what Jung is talking about through this is that we are all one.
Yes.
And when one, like when I heal myself, I heal the all, right?
Yes.
Because we're all in the same consciousness.
Sure.
So it's the collective consciousness that we would like to heal.
Right. And
by changing our thought forms.
Yep. And that's the unique thing that we will be doing at Confluence 23 in October.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to meet the 13th to 16th of October at the Mount Madonna Retreat Center in California.
Mm-hmm.
And what we're going to try to do is first learn how to use the collage to find out about ourselves. And then we're going to try to do a combined collage that captures our collective to the extent that we can do that.
Mm-hmm.
With the participants. And I don't, because a certain type of people will come to this event, I expect we'll have a slightly skewed collective result, but I think we'll have a good start on what our culture needs going forward. That's my hope and guess by doing that. So that's one of the strategies that we'll be using in October. And Colleen Keybert, who's my mentor on this, has been studying this creative process and the collage and the doodle for more than 50 years. And she's really brilliant and gifted in how she teaches these things. So I hope many people will come and join us. And we do have a website now, which I can put the link in here. The website is still under construction, but I will put it on the chat on YouTube. It's confluence23.org. That is the link. And it's not complete, and it's subject to change. I don't think that created a link. Let me see if I can do it a little differently. That maybe a bit better. Okay. So, and you can also take a look at confluence22.org to see what we did last year, last year in June when we did our first confluence. Thanks, Brad, for helping there. Okay, so I'm going to read on. So the coming God moves into this emptiness. If you are in your solitude and all the space around you has become cold and unending, then you have moved far from men, and at the same time you have come near to them as never before. Selfish desire only apparently led you to men, but in reality it led you away from them, and in the end to yourself, which to you and to others was the most remote. But now, if you are in solitude, your God leads you to the God of others, and through that, to the true neighbor, to the neighbor of the self in others. And I have certainly found that to be true in my global travels and work, because I've worked with people all over the world. Okay, so here's the last paragraph of this chapter. If you are in yourself, you become aware of your incapacity. You will see how little capable you are of imitating the heroes and of being a hero yourself. So you also no longer force others to become heroes. Like you, they suffer from incapacity. Incapacity, too, wants to live, but it will overthrow your gods. Okay, comments on that?
There is no judgment.
Right. Among other things. It just makes me crazy when people want to, if I mention my service career, people want to say thank you for your service. And to me, that is a way of like scapegoating to get out of the emptiness that people feel inside. I mean, and that's what it's become anyway. I mean, at one point, the emotion was fair enough, but it's just become ridiculous now, and people have no idea what anything means. And in my service, I was certainly no hero. And if they see me in uniform and see that I am wearing on my uniform a Bronze Star medal, they say, "Oh, how did you get a Bronze Star?" And what they don't know is that you can get a Bronze Star for heroism, or you can get a Bronze Star for doing a good job, like you can in any elementary school in the country, right? A sticker with it that's a Bronze Star. And so I, whenever they do that, I say, well, I got my Bronze Star for doing my job. That's it. Even and so I did nothing heroic to get my Bronze Star, absolutely nothing. But I think that in fairness, even the so-called hero would say that they did nothing special. I mean, I knew a man, I guess I still know him, who instead of going to Vietnam, he, by some quirk of fate, ended up as the general's aide in Hawaii as a second lieutenant. So he was a second lieutenant, and he was a general's aide in Hawaii. I don't know how that happened. And so his general decides he's going to pay a visit to the line. So the general goes for a 2-day visit into Vietnam, and this second lieutenant says, well, General, could you let me go for 2 days? I'd like to go visit one of my friends who's in a forward combat base. And so the general gives him permission. And he goes out to this combat base. And that night, the combat base was overrun by the NVA, the North Vietnamese Army, and all but 19 Marines there were killed, and he was the only surviving officer. And so they were pulled out, of course, after this horrible battle, and he went back to his general and flew away to Hawaii. And so technically, because he was not officially stationed in Vietnam, he had earned none of the Vietnam service medals that all of us wear if we were there. And all he had in the end was the Congressional Medal of Honor. That was his one decoration, official decoration. And later they would have given him the Combat Action Ribbon and the so-called Shirley Highway Medal, which everybody gets after 90 days of service. And so he got into Vietnam and out without even earning the Vietnam service medals, and he won the Congressional Medal of Honor, and he was only there for 2 days on that occasion. He later served a genuine tour in Vietnam, because he must have felt guilty. But I remember when I was a candidate in OCS, he was walking out of our PX one day, and there he was wearing only his Congressional Medal of Honor in his uniform. I think he might have still been a second lieutenant or even a first lieutenant at that point when I saw him. And he was a little bit ahead of me in the service. But anyway, but what he would say, I think, is that he just did what he was trained to do and what he had to do. I worked for another man who in Korea had a very similar thing happen, and he won the Navy Cross. But he was my boss in Vietnam for 3 months, and he said, well, he didn't do anything special. He just his unit got overrun and he had to react, so he followed his training. It wasn't anything about thinking about being a hero or being perfect at all. So anyway, that's sort of a trip down memory lane, but that the point is that, okay, if you get a attaboy or attagirl for doing something, that and now more than $5 will get you a cup of coffee, right? You can't get a cup of coffee for is a very special section. And I think what I'm going to do is just stop talking at this point and we'll do Mysterium Encounter, which is chapter 9 of the Red Book next week. But this week we can talk about anything else that we've talked about in terms of the conception of God and hell in chapter 8. And then we'll just cut the session short, because I want this session to mainly be about this encounter with hell and where it is and how it is. And so I think we would digress too much if I went into Mysterium Encounter. So Brian, you want to say something?
Well, I kind of wanted to circle back to what Nancy had said earlier about this whole idea of, things coming apart. that we're in crisis, et cetera. One of the things that occurs to me is that, human civilization has been in cycles of, inception and, coming to, some formation and then having a crisis and collapse. And not every time is that something that doesn't lead to a dark age.
Yeah.
I think probably the exception, although like a remnant's often left behind, who kind of carries on, like something like monasticism in the West or something. But I don't think there's any guarantee that out of a crisis is going to emerge some, new golden age. It's
absolutely
50-50,
Yeah, we see that in weather and natural disasters where nothing new emerges. It happened and a lot of people were killed, and there you are, you're still there. And you have to rebuild your community, maybe. Or my wife told me just before I came here that Norfolk Southern has had another derailment in Ohio.
Yep.
Today or yesterday. And so the Republican Party, which has resisted putting money into the railroads for the last forever, probably 70, 80 years, all of a sudden is faced with the fact that it's their constituents that are getting the brunt of what their neglect.
Mhm.
And so that's one thing that causes people to change, I guess, is when you don't have any choice.
Mhm.
Right.
But I don't know that being on the cusp of something, wonderful necessitates crossing the threshold. That threshold.
Yeah, you don't have to cross that threshold. I think that, when a cadre of people start to see things that weren't very clear before, then all of a sudden the whole society can change quite a lot. Okay. And so if we look at the Victorian age in America and in England and in Europe as well, which Dr. Jung was born into, that just got swept away by the crash of 1907 and by World War One, and then something new started to emerge in between the two world wars, but because we as human beings didn't recognize that the Germans were human beings as a result of the way we treated them after World War One, we got World War Two. That was a reprise of World War One because we did not help them to repair their culture. And so, yes, we got something quite new and different. We got the middle class after the Second World War quite substantially. But there was nothing specific that caused that. I mean, Nietzsche didn't cause it. Nietzsche didn't cause World War One. He just observed what was going on. Snake here says, funny, my mentor was NVA. His name was Bao, and nobody knew. A lot can come from the self imposed by crisis. We were left with but two alternatives. And that's definitely true. I mean, I've broken several of my bones, and as you see, I had another fall this week. Gravity is not our friend, but you know, we're faced with reality, and what do we do next? And Michelle says, this topic is very much like a recovery meeting. I'm coming up on 10 years sober and clean. Well, yeah, I would say that's probably true. Would you agree, Brian? That this is very much like a recovery meeting. And the issue is that our whole culture needs to recover. And you know, what Nancy was saying about how everything has to be sort of fall apart before it'll come back together. You know, that's happening. We're seeing it fall apart.
We hit bottom.
Pardon?
I was gonna say, if we hit bottom, there's still no guarantee. Like even in the big book, it talks about what's then needed to recover is honesty. And that there are those who can't recover because they can't be completely honest with themselves.
Well, and we're certainly seeing that in our politics right now. And so until we can admit that lying doesn't repair your culture, we're not going to be able to repair our culture. But you know, there may come critical mass, and people will start to realize that, oh, okay, this guy caused the GOP to lose like 3 elections in a row, and maybe 4 coming up, and maybe we ought to change something here. This might not be the best way to proceed.
Well, do you remember in the 80s, 90s when there was, you know, the men's movement, but there was also a lot of like recovery going on?
Yeah.
People would spend like literally a month or 2 or 3 in recovery in, you know, like Hazelden, kinds of, you know, rehab centers, and their insurance would pay for it. And the thing that started to happen is people started to say, like, I can't make these unhealthy choices. I've got to do something different. And, you know, and so the plugs start getting pulled, and insurance doesn't pay for that stuff anymore.
Oh,
And
it doesn't. I'm not aware of it.
Oh,
so you're
no,
saying
no.
insurance doesn't.
Mental health parity is horrific. So I guess what I'm saying is that there are processes in the system, and this is just systems theory, that's going to feed back to maintain the system. But that there has been times inkling of this and that, and people, you know, it's interesting when that stuff submerges, because like even in the 60s, you know, you saw all this sort of Dionysian energy, and then people kind of sold out, and it's like they forgot all that stuff. So it's just interesting how these sort of cycles like come and go, and you know, things start to come together into maybe greater health, or more honesty, or greater wisdom, and then there's like none of that, where the system feeds back on that. And you know, so I don't know, like there's been these times where people have had, you know, I guess inklings of, you know, this greater wisdom, and I don't know how much of that kind of still carries over, how much of the seed of the 60s or the seeds of the 80s, or you know, how much of that is still I don't know, is still out and about and is ready to sort of congeal into something.
Well, it's going to start to congeal, assuredly, but it may take another decade or so. Let's see, the third session that I ever did on this YouTube channel, I was asked in my class, and you can see it on video, why I thought that that Donald Trump was getting so popular all of a sudden. And the way I responded was, well, a lot of folks have been, in their growing up years, were sent to the office for misbehavior, right? And all of a sudden, here's a guy that's getting away with his misbehavior. And so everybody goes, yeah, right. Finally, we can fight back against the man, okay, whoever the man is, whether it's the principal or the guidance counselor or what have you. Finally, we can fight back. And so now I think that as time has gone on, another 6 years has passed since then, what we're seeing is that doesn't work, okay, that you can't fight back in that way, and it's not going to get you anywhere except behind bars maybe, but it isn't necessarily going to solve anything, certainly not going to solve any of your problems. And so then it goes back to the old saw where the guy was walking down the street and he fell in a hole. And so the next time he was walking down the street, he decided, well, maybe I'll walk on the other side of the street and avoid the hole, but he fell in the hole anyway. And then the next time he was walking down the street, he knew the hole was there. He was consciously avoiding the hole. And he still fell in the hole. And then the fourth time, he decides to take another street. And so that's the kind of development that we're starting to see, where, people keep falling into the same hole, and as they did with our former president. And now they're starting to see, I think, that, well, okay, we haven't fixed the rails in 60 years. So there's a second Ohio rail accident in a month. Maybe we ought to think about doing this a different way. That isn't the solution. That's not the solution. But you have to think about those things, I guess. Let me see. There were some other comments here, which I'll just read through. Jonty says, it's like we're facing a period of liminality without an agreed Sherpa guide. I'm glad my mother filled my pockets with Jesus, and fair enough. And she says, hi, I'm Jonty. I'm a Jungaholic. Okay, fine. My view is that Jung was surely not a perfect man, and if I ever physically knew him in the physical world, I might not have liked him much. But the Jung that I've created for myself in my mind, I do like very much, and I like all his flaws. Or let's say I don't necessarily like them, but I have accepted them. And then Snake says, after 12 years of sobriety, Carl Jung and Dr. Bob, the spiritual experience is more than I ever imagined. And then recovery isn't profitable. And Richard says, mysticism is fun, but you can't take Priapus anywhere. Yeah, no kidding. Let's see. The best medicine is a little laugh out loud and Chloropromazine. Well, I'm not promoting any drugs here, and I have no idea what Chauncey just said. So,
Thorazine.
do you know what it is?
Thorazine. It's an antipsychotic.
Okay, well, if you're interested in such things, you need to go talk to a psychiatrist, not to me. Yeah, I don't know what is or how anyone would be it. And then Snake says, haha, I got a job as a utility worker. When you flush your toilet, you can thank me. Okay, fair enough. We thank people like that all the time, and I certainly do. And I always make friends with the custodians of schools right away as soon as possible. And I actually served as a custodian one summer, so I have that direct experience to make me respect people who do that work. It's very difficult work, and we need it in our society, and we're very grateful for it, at least in my view. So anything else that we'd like to talk about? I've read through the YouTube channel chat. Brian, anything else?
Well, I keep returning to, like nothing under the sun is new kind of thing. But, the Second Coming by Yeats, I feel like we're at that point. I feel like we're at kind of like when Jung had his descent before World War One.
Mm-hmm.
That things are really coming apart.
Yeah, they definitely are.
Just the one line, the ceremony of innocence is drowned, the best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. And I sort of cast my eyes on the politics of Florida, and things are happening that are reminiscent of like 1936.
Yeah.
Germany, where people would have said like, well, if I'd been in Germany, I would have. It's like, here we are.
Yeah.
It's happening right now in front of us.
Yeah, we don't have to look at 1930s Germany. We can look at ourselves and see what needs to be seen. So Penelope has arrived. She's a longtime friend of mine and follower of this channel now and again. And she says that she was in contract cleaning for 30 years. Then Jonty goes on, there was a Simpsons episode where Homer gets his hand stuck in a drinks machine. When the fire brigade arrived, they ask him, are you still holding the can, Homer? What's your point? He says. Yeah, fair enough. And Snake says, I kept falling in that hole. Richard, I love The Simpsons. Omelette. Oh, Fromage says, hello. And this is nothing if not an omelet. And I made a wonderful omelet for my wife and me this morning. Penelope says, yes, Uranus is moving to the same degree it was at the start of World War II in October 2023. Pluto is leaving Capricorn on March 23rd, 2023. And Zephyr says it's feeling quite 1995. So we are definitely looking at the irrational side of the world, but it certainly is true that a lot of things are happening, but things have been falling apart very seriously since the time of Nietzsche. And one of the things I mentioned earlier on this review by Biner, and I urge you to take a look at that review. And he talks about the fact, and it's basically the same thing that Jung was talking about, which is that we have to have a meaning. If we don't have a meaning in our life, if we don't have a purpose in our life, then we're in deep, deep trouble. And so that's what I guess has gotten us out of these kinds of troubles in the past. And you need a psychological container. One of the issues is this thing, okay? Because all of us, certainly kids coming up, but all of us are also in some way addicted to our cell phones these days. And what's observed about young people as they're coming up is they're so focused. I mean, having middle school students, they can't stand to be away from their cell phone for 30 minutes without feeling anxiety. And the issue is that without getting away from the cell phone will work as a psychic container, except it's a vicarious psychic container. In other words, it doesn't provide you with an experience of life. And so in order to develop as a human being, you have to get away from that. You have to put that cell phone away and go out and find a mate, for example. Get some experience in life, in our physical life, because as long as you're in there, you're not having a real life and not an authentic life. Thank you, Penelope. That's very kind of you. So comment, Brian.
Well, I don't see that changing. I mean, it's a great idea, but it's almost like we're becoming cyborgs. I have two nephews who literally grew up on screens, and they don't know how to be with people.
Well, here's the thing. A few years ago in my community, we were without power and trapped for 1 week. Okay, we had flooding was so bad off the Chesapeake Bay during Hurricane Isabel that I was literally living on an island, and there was no power. And if there's no power, you don't have any cell service. And then what do? I mean, it's all well and good while you have food in the pantry, but pretty soon you come down to the essentials, right? And that's how it changes. Quite possibly. I mean, the people of Texas saw this a couple of years ago when there was a big snowstorm in Texas, and all of a sudden they realized that their politicians in their infinite wisdom had cut Texas off from the rest of the grid. So, thinking, oh, Texas, we have all this oil and gas, so we'll be all right. We'll just have, we'll just be ourselves, and everybody else is cut off from our oil and gas. But oh, by the way, you're also cut off if you're cut off, and having that oil and gas in the ground doesn't get it into your home.
If your brain develops with completely extrinsic image formation, and without the process of listening to someone tell you a story, and you sort of make a movie in your head about what's happening, where you like exercise your imagination and hear about what a unicorn could be described as, and you make a unicorn in your head, that function is atrophied.
Yeah. That's surely true.
I mean, to an amazing extent. So you can cut the power for a week and there's a crisis, but the power is going to come back on and we're going to get reconnected. And like, but
in theory, I mean, the people of Ukraine have found that isn't true necessarily, or at least some parts of Ukraine, where their city simply gets pulverized. So, pretty quick, if your city is cut off from electricity for a year, you're in deep trouble. Okay. And you better go out and learn some Boy Scouting and Girl Scouting skills. But it doesn't work that way, unfortunately. I mean, my father got in the Naval Academy because he was an Eagle Scout, and he had been a member of the National Boy Scout Band. Well, that was terrific. It got him sent to Netherlands in 1937, believe it or not. He went to the International Boy Scout Jamboree in 1937 in the Netherlands. What that did for him was it got him in the Naval Academy. And so he spent the entire period of World War II in the Naval Academy. Thank goodness for me, because otherwise he might not have survived. And, but when I came along in Boy Scouting, those were all guys who had come out of World War II at that time, and they had had a snootful, and I couldn't get them to take me on a 5-mile hike for my second class rating as a Boy Scout. So I never made it past Tenderfoot because the troop leaders wouldn't go for a 5-mile hike and observe us taking this walk. And so, even scouting fell away. And of course, now it's fallen away for other reasons, but we better learn the basics of life, how to survive in some way. We will be reliant on those that do at some point. If we think that's not true, think again. I mean, the people of Texas learned that. My community learned that. I learned that when we had Hurricane Isabel and we were cut off for a week. Life gets pretty primitive pretty fast. When something happens, and we're a week away. Most of us, I would say, are a week away from being on survival mode, and then what? Let's see. I guess I'm going to call this to a halt because we're sort of drifting. But anyway, thank you for being here today, Brian, and my other friend who is cloaked. I won't name, but it's great to have someone to push me along on these things. And so next week we will go into the Mysterium Encounter, which is quite interesting. And in the meantime, remember that next Saturday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, we'll be having this Wisdom Path session with Mary Stein. It will be broadcast on YouTube and will be recorded for later viewing. But if you'd like to ask Mary Stein anything, especially on the topic of his book, Men Under Construction, or these issues related to men and purpose or meaning in their lives, that would be the time to come and ask him live. You don't have to come onto the panel to do that. If you're on YouTube, I will read your questions out too at that point. But I hope a lot of people will join us on Saturday. And if you're registered for Wisdom Path, you'll probably get the link. Let's see. Let me just I'm going to give you the link once again for the MailChimp listing. So if you're not listed on on my MailChimp list, you can add yourself now and pick the things that you'd like to be notified for, and we will send you notices. I try to keep it down to one a week, but sometimes there's 2 a week, but I don't spam people as much as possible. So anyway, so everyone remember that 13 to 16 October 2023, we will be having Confluence 23 in Watsonville, California at the Mount Madonna Retreat Center, and we'd love to see you there. And so mark it on your calendar and come and join us. We're going to have a fun time, I think. Any other comments? Okay. All right. I'm going to call it to a halt. Good morning, everyone. Have a good day, and we'll see you next